Going to get this started. Just want to welcome everyone who has joined us today for this sort of lunch and learn webinar called Putting the Fair Back in Fair Housing. I am Amber Burton Alfred. I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs and Advocacy for the Houston Association of Realtors. And I'm so excited to be with you all today to talk about this really important topic. If you don't know, April is Fair Housing Month, but fair housing is an ongoing I don't want to say issue in a negative term, but it's an ongoing topic that's addressed and that people have to follow. So we have some excellent speakers with us today. We have Alexia Smokler from the National Association of Realtors, and we have Lori Bunner with the National Fair Housing Alliance. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. They are experts in this field. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to them and let them tell you about their background so we can get into these questions. I'm going to start off with Alexia. Can you give us your background, Alexia?
Sure. Thanks, Amber. And it's great to be with you today, Houston. So I am the Senior Policy Representative for Fair Housing at NAR. I just joined NAR in January. This position is new. We have a new fair housing team at NAR that didn't exist about 18 months ago. Before joining as staff, I spent most of last year working as a consultant, helping NAR launch its ACT Fair Housing Initiative, which I'm going to tell you about a little more later. Before coming on board as a consultant, I worked at HUD's Office of Fair Housing, where I enforced the Fair Housing Act. Prior to that, I worked for Congressman John Conyers Jr. from my hometown of Detroit for about 5 years. And I've also worked with various civil rights organizations, including one that's a member of Lori's organization, the Equal Rights Center, where I was involved in doing discrimination testing. Lori, I'll pass it over to you.
All right, thank you. So I am Lori Bunner. I am the Associate Vice President of Programs for the National Fair Housing Alliance. And like Alexia, I am relatively new in my role. I've been with NAFA for, I guess, about 4 months now. And prior to that, I spent 6.5 years with the Maryland Association of Realtors as the Director of Housing Programs. And so it was a natural progression in the work that I did with Maryland Realtors. And it's I find it particularly gratifying because I can continue to work with my realtor colleagues and work with Alexia and her team to really dig into a lot of these issues. Before working with Maryland Realtors, I spent about 4 years doing housing redevelopment and neighborhood revitalization work in Baltimore City. So my recent career has really been all about housing and all aspects of it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Like I said to the audience, these ladies are going to really give us a really deep dive into fair housing. I'm so excited. And thank you for taking this time to stay with us today, guys. I'm going to just start off with our first question. We have about a little over under an hour and a half now. So, and there's a lot of information to cover, several decades worth. So I want to get started. Lori, I'll start with you. Can we discuss what if NFHA is and what you all do?
Yes, so the National Fair Housing Alliance, NAFA, is a 33-year-old nonprofit civil rights organization that works to eliminate housing discrimination and to ensure equal housing opportunity through leadership, education, outreach, member services, public policy initiatives, community development, advocacy, and enforcement. So we kind of really cover we check all the boxes when it comes to fair housing work. We also serve as a trade association for fair housing agencies all across the US. Although there's a whole swath of the middle of the country where we have supporting members, but not operating members. And supporting members are those organizations committed to upholding fair housing, but don't specifically focus exclusively on fair housing. Operating members are our fair housing centers, which are exclusively dedicated to fair housing efforts. And I'm happy to say that we currently have 5 member organizations in Texas, including the Greater Houston Fair Housing Center.
That's awesome. Thank you. I jot that down. So with that being said, with your long history, I want both of you guys to kind of give us an overview of what fair housing means and why is it a civil rights issue. I'm going to bounce to Alexia with that to start it off, and then we'll look back to you, Lori.
Sure. So what is fair housing? Well, there are layers to this. First, we have the law. You have a legal obligation as someone working in a licensed industry, serving the public, providing housing, not to treat people differently because of their race, religion, sex, or the other prohibited bases under the Fair Housing Act. That is the bare minimum you can do. Avoid legal liability. Now, as a member of NAR, we have our code of ethics. That says you have to provide equal professional service to all clients, regardless of their background. The code covers those 7 prohibited bases from the Fair Housing Act, plus sexual orientation and gender identity. So NAR members must abide by the Fair Housing Act as well as the code. We provide tools to help you ensure that you're treating everyone who walks into your office equally. Also, with Article 10.5 of the code, which was just added last year, we say that in all aspects of your life, not just selling real estate, if you want to be a member of this trade association and wear that R on your lapel, then you may not engage in slurs, epithets, or hate speech because of any of those prohibited bases. But there's a bigger picture to fair housing. When we step back and see ourselves as community leaders, as people who are concerned about the economy and its growth, about people who are looking not just at today's business opportunities, but who are looking into the future. What do the homeowners of the future look like? And what is happening today, right now, that may be limiting homeownership opportunities for people in the future based on those prohibited reasons? And how can we advocate for policies that make sure that homeownership is accessible to all qualified buyers today and going forward? That's how I define fair housing.
Awesome. That's really, I like what you said about the homeowners of the future. I think that's really critical to think about right now. Our children, I know you have a daughter, Alexia, but she's little, but it's time to start thinking about that and making some policies that will impact them in a positive way. Lori, I know you guys deal a lot with the policy side of it, and you can be a little bit more open and honest with us because you don't work for a realtor association like Alexia and myself. So I want to turn it over to you, kind of ask you the same question. Why is it a civil rights issue? I know you have some interesting thoughts to share on that.
Yeah, and I, you won't find Alexia and I, diverging too much. So you won't get, point and counterpoint too much from us. But I think from the real estate industry perspective, we tend to think of fair housing through almost an exclusively discrimination-focused lens. And at NAPA, we consider fair housing to be really a broader civil rights issue. When people are offered equitable resources and opportunities to secure safe, affordable housing, they have endless possibilities. And this outcome isn't just good for individuals, but for all of us. Our communities are stronger and healthier when they're more equitable. Opportunity or lack thereof determines where people live, and where people live determines access to technology, healthcare, transportation, education, employment. It further determines personal and family wealth. So while fair housing has implications beyond just discrimination in housing opportunity, which realistically disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities, I should emphasize that fair housing goes beyond race and ethnicity. Nationwide, disability is the #1 category of housing-related discrimination complaints. And this tends to impact renters more than buyers, but it's still important to note because the laws are truly there to protect everyone.
Thank you, Lori. That's a really great point. Alexia, kicking it back over to you, can we kind of talk about the evolution of fair housing at NAR? You mentioned kind of the rules and where they are on your lapel as a realtor. I think it'd be interesting for our members to hear about that.
Yeah, thanks. So when it's come to fair housing, NAR and the real estate industry have come a long way. Our code of ethics in 1923 said that it was a violation if you sold a house to a Black family in a white neighborhood, and you could be disciplined for doing that. Real
Well,
estate agents advised the federal government when they created the redlining maps that created segregated communities with pockets of disinvestment that persist to this day. We wrote racially restrictive covenants into deeds that stopped generations of Black people and others from buying homes, building equity, and passing that wealth down to their children. We opposed passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. Back then, we called it forced housing. Over the decades, we came around. We support the Fair Housing Act. We supported the amendments to the Fair Housing Act that added additional prohibited bases, disability, families with children. We supported that. We partner with fair housing groups now, like NAFA. We support funding for HUD's enforcement of the Fair Housing Act. We've done that for a few decades. But in the last 18 months or so, we've really redoubled our efforts. We hired Brian Green, who used to be the chief of fair housing enforcement at HUD, to come on board as our fair housing director. And after he spent a year in that role, he was promoted to VP of policy. So now he oversees all of the policy development in our Washington policy shop that lobbies Congress. And so he brings that fair housing perspective to everything that we do. We've launched a new fair housing initiative that I'm going to talk about, I think, a little later, and we've made fair housing one of our top priorities. So we acknowledge our history, and because of the role that we played in creating a segregated country and denying home ownership to people who were qualified and creating this racial home ownership gap that we now have, we also acknowledge that we have a special role to play in repairing those harms.
thank you, Alexia. I didn't know that exactly. So I think that's really great. And I'm sure some of our members didn't know that history. I like when you said that it was kind of seen as forced housing. And I think that's really an issue that that's so prevalent, that thought process today. And I really hope that today we can learn some ways to, like you said, mend that. So Lori, I wanted to, we're going really fast covering all this. So I want to make sure we really flesh this out well. Lori, what does NAFA do in regards to this? You mentioned that you all have people you work with here in Houston, over the nation, association that you collaborate with. Could you talk some more about that and kind of you all's perspective and how the origin of NAFA and you're working with NAR under these issues about it being seen as a negative initially?
Well, kind of, to piggyback off of what Alexia was saying, the racial issues are a touchy subject for a lot of people. I'm sure that every one of us have seen in social media comments or in the chat on a webinar or conference presentation, people getting upset when we discuss race and real estate. And I don't mean upset about the injustice. I mean upset because they've been in the business for 30 years and they've never seen anyone discriminated against. I hear that over and over. Or because they feel that being white or being a realtor or being a white realtor has lumped them in with some bad actors, such as those that we heard about in the Newsday investigation. And that's why continuing to highlight historical education is so important. I've seen our real estate industry colleagues consistently shocked when they learn about redlining even though it's largely taught in pre-licensing and fair housing classes. So in order to understand why we're focusing on these efforts, we need to understand how we got here in the first place, which is exactly what Alexia shared with us. Realtors were complicit in upholding housing discrimination, racial segregation, and excluding Black real estate practitioners. The Chicago Association of Realtors and later NAR apologized for realtors' roles, which generated a lot of controversy. But acknowledging those wrongs and how the impacts can still be felt today is really critical in moving forward and understanding why we as an industry need to develop policies and programs to help shore up those inequities. NAFA's CEO, Lisa Rice, tells a story about how when her parents were going to buy a house in Ohio many, many years ago, they were not allowed to buy in the neighborhood where they wanted to buy. So they had to choose an alternative neighborhood. Well, flash forward decades later, the house that they wanted to buy is now worth $300,000, and the house that they were allowed to buy is worth $50,000. So we see that type of thing over and over and over again. And that's, when we talk about the racial wealth gap, and when we talk about generational wealth and, the absence that the Black community populations have, that those funds could be used to give to their own children to buy a house or to pay for college education. So when we talk about the home ownership and wealth gap, those two go hand in glove. When we look at redlining maps, I can give an example, in Baltimore. If you take an old redlining map and you overlay it with a map of current neighborhoods which are disinvested and poverty stricken, those maps, they're almost the same from all of those decades ago. So even though we like to think, things have improved, there's still a long way to go. And so, NAFA is one of the only nationwide organizations solely dedicated to fair housing. So these partnerships are critical. Partnerships with, with NAR, with realtor organizations, and that's something that we're going to focus on more and more as years go by, because really realtors are the first stop for home buyers, and so having them not only adhering to fair housing laws, but being champions of fair housing and really leaning into these issues is going to be absolutely critical. Like this is an all hands on deck type of thing. This can't just be a moment, born out of some tragic situations. There's a lot of people who have been fighting these fights for years and decades. And so we need to make sure that the momentum that we have now really continues on.
I totally agree. Thank you, Lorraine. And piggybacking on what you both mentioned some of the restrictive deeds and covenants. Just so you know, Texas realtors, that's one of the issues they've taken on. Many of our state representatives and senators have filed bills to make it easier to have those, in Texas anyway, to have those restrictions removed. Even though they're not enforceable as a matter of public policy legally anymore, it still is really hard to see that when you go to buy a house. I know we have Herman Park in Houston, which is a beautiful park where people go and work out. And my husband sent me the deed when I guess Mr. Herman, whomever gave that land to the city, it said that no Negroes were allowed to even visit the park. So I know Rice University has some similar language like that when they were created. So I think it's a great step to mention that, even though initially, because of the times, realtors were a part of those restrictive covenants, that now we're going back in and fixing that. So I want you guys to kind of know that Texas is definitely working on that. So now that we've kind of went over the background and history of fair housing and how your organizations are involved, it's like you said, it's now 2021. Lori, you mentioned the maps from the redlining back in the day, and you can lay them over on what's going on now, and it's almost the same. So we're still facing these same issues in housing in a lot of ways. So I want to talk about that now. Alexia, can you tell us about the Newsday investigation? I know you guys briefly mentioned it, and we've had some events around that issue, but I'd like to get your perspective on that, and also racial home ownership gaps and what you've been seeing during COVID-19.
Yeah, thanks. So for those of you who aren't familiar, in December of 2019, a newspaper on Long Island released an investigation about discrimination in real estate that really rocked the industry. They conducted a 3-year study using discrimination testing to look at how the top 12 brokerages on Long Island treated clients of different backgrounds. You may be familiar with discrimination testing. It's kind of like using a secret shopper to see what kind of service a store is providing. There are 2 testers posing as clients. They both have the same qualifications. They're even dressed the same. And they're looking for the same kind of a house in the same general location. The only difference between them is their race or national origin or sexual orientation or whatever basis we're testing for. Courts consider testing evidence to be some of the most persuasive and strongest evidence a plaintiff in a discrimination case can bring. After its 3-year study, Newsday didn't take its findings to court. They could have, but instead they published them. And what they caught on hidden camera was that real estate agents treated the white tester and the tester of color differently in 40% of interactions, almost half the time when the tester was Black. Agents showed them fewer listings. They steered them to different neighborhoods based on their race or their national origin. They required some to be pre-approved to go out and see listings and not others based on their race. They told them different things about crime in schools. I would encourage you, if you haven't watched the documentary yet, to check it out. It's eye-opening. I'm posting a link in the chat box. So after that investigation was published, the New York State Legislature launched hearings. They subpoenaed agents and brokers. They wrote a scathing report on real estate discrimination. They've introduced 10 or 12 pieces of legislation this year to combat discrimination. And then we just heard on Friday that the New York Department of State has launched 132 investigations of agents, brokers, and real estate instructors, 52 of which are related to the Newsday report. So they're piggybacking and branching out, investigating others as well. They've already revoked the license of 1 agent, and we understand that there are 18 more licenses at risk. So to jump over to your other question about the racial homeownership gap, the gap between whites and Blacks is 30 points. It's the same as it was when housing discrimination was legal in 1968. In fact, I think it's a little higher now. The Urban Institute predicts that if current trends continue, the homeownership rate is going to drop for all groups, about 3% total. Their analysis shows that the average homeowner is getting older. People aren't forming as many new households. We're seeing young people living with their parents longer, people having roommates, people buying homes later in life. This is because of a number of reasons. Limited inventory, that's been a problem for at least a decade, but is now reaching a crisis with prices going up and out of reach for young people who are burdened with more student loan debt than their parents ever had, and for historically disadvantaged communities. And the prediction from the Urban Institute, and I'm going to give you guys another link here in the chat, is that the homeownership rate is going to drop for all groups, but it's going to drop the most for Black people. So the prediction is that that gap is going to get bigger, both because of structural barriers to homeownership for people of color, like a system of credit scoring that doesn't really accurately capture a person's ability to pay a mortgage, and because the Great Recession, natural disasters, and COVID-19 have hit Black households hardest. And I think Lori is going to talk a little more about the history behind that, because that's not an accident. So if we do nothing, the average homeowner is getting older, younger people aren't getting into homes, structural barriers are keeping qualified buyers out of homeownership, disproportionately people of color. You're looking at a shrinking real estate market. So at NAR, we're pushing for policies that will make homeownership more accessible for qualified buyers. Alternative credit scoring models that more accurately capture a person's level of risk for a mortgage. Down payment assistance, housing counseling, student debt relief, tax relief, to name a few. But we're also taking a special look at groups that have been historically disadvantaged to help close those gaps.
That's awesome, Alexia. I think I like you said, you're guys looking at policy. I think that's so important. Obviously, that's my department area, but I just think globally, policy and lawmaking pushes so much of what realtors do. So I think that's great. Just please keep us in the loop on that if we need any call for actions coming up, things like that. And I know, Lori, you have a lot to share on the same topic. So I'm going to pose the same question to you about the, not the Newsday investigation, but about, can you kind of go over what you guys have seen in NAFA with the racial home ownership disparities and what's trending in y'all's predictions?
Sure. So a lot of the information that we're using for our Keys Unlock Dreams initiative, which I'll talk a little bit about later, is based on a lot of the same research from the Urban Institute that Alexia mentioned. And it's great because, you know, having consistent sources of information and consistent data and statistics, it really helps, you know, industry groups to lock arms and move forward. But I would like to touch on, you know, one of the items that she mentioned, and that has to do with investigation and enforcement. I want all real estate professionals to understand that it's not if, it's when, in terms of testing and enforcement. And I know I'm speaking with mostly realtors here, but I include all industry professionals in this: lenders, appraisers, inspectors. Testing and enforcement will be increasing all across the country. Our current federal administration, which of course includes HUD, is serious about rectifying policy reversals, rectifying the policy reversals that were done by the Trump administration. You know, just this morning, we learned that the administration is already taking those steps by reinstating some rules relating to disparate impact and affirmatively furthering fair housing. President Biden, immediately after taking office, signed an executive order on advancing racial equity. As Alexia mentioned, NAR changed a provision to the Code of Ethics last year dealing with social media and hate speech. So industry-wide, there is a will to hold violators accountable. There will be realtors who lose their license to practice real estate. Business will be impacted. And it's imperative that everyone gets serious about this, not only because it's legally and ethically the right thing to do, but because there could be severe consequences. And while, of course, there's consequences for those violators of fair housing laws, the individuals that really bear the brunt of those consequences are the consumers who are denied opportunities.
Thank you, Lori, for touching on the enforcement issues and how this impacts our realtors. Why do you think it's important to educate people on the ongoing impacts of estoral inequities, Lori?
I mean, I think it's really a matter of moving forward. You know, I mentioned before that, you know, that we all hear people pushing back on why are we doing this? Why are we paying attention? Fair Housing Act was 50 years ago, like get over it. Everyone's on equal footing now, but we know that's not the case. And so what I have learned in my work, and particularly when I was at Maryland Realtors, is that our membership and membership as a whole at NAR and across the country is very, very diverse. It's diverse politically, socially, in all areas. It's diverse, and so you're going to get a lot of differing opinions on these matters. So I do think that NAR is on the right track by kind of holding people accountable and saying that some of these behaviors that you're displaying is not okay, because quite frankly, like, you can't just turn off like being a racist. If you are a racist in your personal life, that is going to bleed over into your business life, and that's not acceptable. So I think that realizing that there are all different levels of understanding of these issues. So you have a lot of people who are just now starting to understand this larger national racial conversation that's been happening over the years, because quite frankly, and I've said this before, and I know I get kind of mixed reviews on saying it, or mixed reactions, but when it comes down to it, largely speaking, white people have not had to think about race. I've never been followed around in a store because someone was afraid I was going to shoplift, or I'm not worried if I get pulled over by the police. So there's a lot of things that, my friends and colleagues have had to deal with their whole life. Joanne Poole tells a story about where she went to sell a home and the seller would not let her in. They would let her buyers in, but they would not let her in because she's a Black woman. And those stories are heartbreaking, but I think we have to be a little bit patient and a little bit understanding in realizing that realistically, there's a lot of people who are just learning about these things, the history, the situations that their friends and neighbors and colleagues have to deal with. So having a little bit of grace in educating people and by spreading the word about these issues, I think is important, because it runs the gamut from, unfortunately, from those who flat out deny that discrimination exists to people who have lived kind of under the thumb of discrimination for their whole life. So, being cognizant of that and creating education that really covers all of these issues in terms of not only the legal side of fair housing, but the implicit bias and a lot of those things. And I know NAR has done a lot of good work in that department, and I'm excited to see that continue. So that's kind of where my head is at. I know I kind of went off on a tangent a little bit, but sometimes you kind of get me rolling on these things.
I think it was great. I like the passion, and you're right. I love what you said about grace, extending grace. It's kind of my theme for 2020. I think we all, in all areas of life, have to extend grace to one another. And even for me as a woman of color, a Black woman, these conversations are difficult at times. And even I have to be patient, understanding with other people, because I'm like, okay, I know I'm Black every day, all day, but I try to be patient and explain things to other people, because they, like you said, they don't know, or they're really curious. It's not something that they're being racist or rude. They really are trying to learn. So I think these conversations like this are really valuable. So again, thank you for eating off on a tangent. I think that was great information you shared. I do want to make sure we have time for you to talk about the resources and tools that both of your organizations offer to our members, because although this is a heartfelt, emotional subject, we still are a business association and want to make sure that our members have the proper tools to navigate this. And I see there's some questions in the chat. After we wrap up this section of the discussion, we will be turning it over to Q&A to address questions from the audience. So Cherry, we're not ignoring you. We'll get back to your question a little bit later towards the end of the program. So Like I said, we've covered so much valuable information already. I would like for you guys to tell us about the different initiatives and resources you all have. Lori, I'm going to start off with you since you just finished talking. You can kind of segue into what you all can do. Can you tell us more about the Keys Unlock Dreams program that we love that title. Our professional development director loved it. And I said, well, we can't use that so much because he's going to be actually on the call, but I think that's a great name. So tell us about that, and then if you want to share any slides during this time, guys, you have time to do that. Quick videos or whatever to really show the members what's going on. So Lori.
Sure, I am going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
Can you just give me a thumbs up if that's coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So Keys Unlock Dreams is a brand new nationwide initiative with goals specifically related to homeownership, and even more specifically to Black and Brown homeownership. Now, the initiative will, and I'm going to break the cardinal rule of presentations here, and for these next couple slides, you'll see me reading some information off of it, and I do that for the benefit of our friends who are in listen-only mode or can't view the screen right now. So we're initially starting off with this initiative by focusing on 10 cities, and those are Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, Baltimore, Maryland, Houston, Texas, New Orleans, Louisiana, Oakland, California, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. We are likely, pending additional funding, going to expand to some other areas. So while we're going to be doing a deep dive in some of these cities and some of the issues and some of the research that I'll talk about, a lot of the content information is good all over the country. But I'm very happy that we're going to be focusing on Houston for one of these because frankly, I want to have an opportunity to come visit you guys. So when I say we're launching in these cities, we're going to be hosting events. And there's going to be industry event and consumer facing event, at least 2 in each city. And depending on the timing and where we are with the pandemic, some of these, we're hoping that most of these can be in person, but a couple of them are going to start off virtually. So the industry event is really going to be what we kind of see a one-day housing symposium, housing summit conference type of thing for industry professionals. And of course, realtor groups and realtist groups are included in that. And then there's going to be consumer-facing events. And those are really designed to provide prospective home buyers with tools, resources, information to put them on the path to homeownership. So we'll be kind of really getting down to the basics for first-time buyers in terms of housing counseling and education, in terms of credit and finance. We will be talking about the importance of using a realtor as part of this and explaining the process because it can be so overwhelming. So the main initiative goals are to remove structural barriers that perpetuate racial inequity, expand.
We're getting a little bit of feedback. It's kind of hard to hear you. I don't know if something's in the back. I just want to let you know on the audio.
Let me. Is it really distracting?
I want to make sure we can hear what you're saying.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll just try unplugging my headphones. There's no noise in my house, so I'm not quite sure where it's coming from. Let me try that. Is that a little bit better?
Yes. Yeah, it's gone now. Might be something from the headphones.
Okay, except for now, I can't hear you.
Oh, you can't hear me? Oh no. We'll put it back on.
Okay. Right, let me bear with me 1 moment.
I was just getting some comments in the chat and wanted to make sure everybody could. We're doing good on time, so don't worry. Get you ready. Technical
Is this any
difficulty.
better? Okay, I put my big ugly headphones on. Sorry about that. Okay, so the main initiative goals are to remove structural barriers that perpetuate racial inequities, expand affordable and fair housing options, preventing an unbalanced recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, empowering consumers with critical information and resources to help them become home buyers, and to help close the racial wealth and homeownership gaps. The first 5 initiative components are research, advocacy and policy, products and programs, education and outreach, and partnerships. As for research, we're partnering with Zillow and the Urban Institute to do a deep dive in each of our key cities. In 2018, Trulia completed a study to align with the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. And this study examined 4 metro areas, one of those being Houston. And they looked at community disparities related to financial services, health services, healthy food access, and fitness and outdoor recreation amenities. You might not be surprised to learn that non-white areas had far less access than the predominantly white areas. And we'll be updating that research for this initiative, as well as looking at racial homeownership gaps and home value gaps, home price trends and housing supply, credit score data, and use of HUD housing choice vouchers. We'll also be doing a deep dive in each of these cities into their assessments of fair housing and community health needs assessments, which will help inform advocacy and policy work. The products and programs and education and outreach components are largely consumer focused. We want prospective home buyers to feel prepared, confident, and educated about the home buying process. And finally, this entire partnership, or this entire initiative, is all based on partnership with housing organizations, nonprofits, city and county government, realtor and realtist associations, including NAREB, NAREP, corporations, lending institutions, and other community-based groups. Keys Unlocked Dreams will help lift up the goals and aspirations of our partners. And one of those partners is NAREB, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. They have an initiative to, oops, I messed up on my slides here. They have an initiative.
There you go.
That's 2 million new Black homeowners in the next 5 years. We are also part of the Black Homeownership Collaborative, and Alexia has also been part of a lot of those subgroups. So when I say partnership and all of these industries working together, that's exactly what I mean. So the Black Homeownership Collaborative has a goal of 3 million net new Black homeowners by 2030. And then finally, another of our partners is the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, NAREP, and they have a goal of 50% Latino homeownership rate by 2024. So it's absolutely critical that all of these groups come together and work in partnership to lift up these goals, because it's really kind of a situation of, you know, when we go farther when we go together.
Thank you, Lori. That was awesome. Looks like you guys have a great plan. I'll forgive you that you're coming to Houston in the 2nd year and going to Detroit, Alexia's hometown, the 1st year. But looking forward to that. And I know that Kenya Burrell Van Warmer, my Government Affairs Advisory Chair, connected us early on. So I'm looking forward to working with you during that year. And Alexia, obviously we work with NAR very closely. You're our parent organization. So I want to make sure we hear from you as well on the ACT Fair Housing Plan and what other resources that NAR has available for our members. And again, feel free to share screen, share videos, slides, whatever you want to do during this time.
Thank you. Yes, we have a lot going on. We've been really busy. So ACT is our Fair Housing Initiative. ACT is an acronym that stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. We launched ACT shortly after the publication of the Newsday investigation. It was a real wake-up call that we needed to do more. It's a package of industry reforms and tools for members, associations, and brokerages, shoring up our own house. Part of it is to make sure we hold real estate professionals accountable when they violate fair housing laws. But also, we want to shift hearts and minds so that equal service is something that is just woven into the way we serve consumers and the public. And so that when we say that realtors hold themselves to a high ethical standard, upholding fair housing is core to that. So ACT, the A is for accountability. Under accountability, we are launching a self-testing program that will allow brokerages who want to voluntarily test themselves for discrimination to uncover and address problems before one of Lori's friends or a private or a newspaper uncovers them. We're creating a methodology and infrastructure that will allow interested brokerages to be tested, receive a confidential report of the findings, and then have access to training or other remediation measures to correct whatever problems, if any, are uncovered. And I want to note that in Newsday, 12 brokerages were tested. There were findings against 10, but 2 of them had no findings. You know, it is possible to pass this test. Also on the accountability front, we're engaged in a review of the licensure laws of all 50 states. We're looking at enforcement of fair housing violations, and we're also looking at fair housing education requirements. And we will be providing best practices to our state AEs who want to work with their legislatures to strengthen their licensure laws. The next 2 prongs of ACT, culture change and training, are interwoven. We're very excited about a video series we're about to launch of realtor fair housing champions who embrace fair housing as part of their business strategy. And we're going to be finding other ways to acknowledge and lift up realtors who are fair housing leaders so that we all applaud and celebrate fair housing. We're also introducing new and innovative training opportunities for realtors. So in June, we released a 50-minute training video on implicit bias in real estate, which is available for free on our website, and there's the link in the chat. Implicit bias is the way that our brains automatically, and often without our conscious awareness, associate stereotypes with people who are different from us. We all do it. It's the way the human mind works. So even as our conscious minds reject discrimination, and even as we hold up fairness and equal treatment as cherished values, our unconscious minds may be causing us to treat people differently or unfairly without our even intending to. So this training offers practical tools customized for the real estate context to help us identify and overcome our own hidden biases so that we can treat all consumers fairly. Following up on that video, we're launching a 3-hour classroom course on implicit bias that goes even deeper, and it will be available for CE credit. We're currently piloting that training in 3 states, including Texas. It's going to be offered in about 10 days, and it might already be full, but If you reach out to Deb Hernandez at the State Association, I don't know, maybe she can sneak you in. And then back in November, we launched Fairhaven, a fair housing simulation. Fairhaven is a new approach to fair housing training. There isn't anything else like it. We decided to create it not long after Newsday was published. We saw in more than one of those hidden camera videos, agents referencing their fair housing training. They talked about what they weren't supposed to do, and then they did it anyway. Something wasn't connecting. We could see that we needed a new kind of fair housing training, one that teaches not only the substance of fair housing law, but that would also move more agents to embrace it. And that's how we came up with Fairhaven. It's an immersive simulation experience that uses the power of storytelling to affect the learner's emotions. In real estate scenarios inspired by real fair housing cases, learners will confront discrimination from the point of view of both agent and client. So now I'm going to share a little video with you and take you in for a little peek into Fairhaven. Let's hope I can get this to work. Okay, yes. Can you all see that? All right. Let me just get this. All right. So the fictional town of Fairhaven, it's a beautiful place. Modern design, gorgeous graphics. It's really a pleasure to be there until you run into all the discrimination going on. Learners in this fictional town take the role of an agent. Their goal is to sell 4 homes in 6 months. As learners work against the clock to close deals, they encounter different kinds of discrimination. A seller backs out of a deal after learning the buyer is Black. A condo board won't let a buyer who uses a wheelchair build a ramp to access the lobby. You're hosting an open house with prospects of different backgrounds. Do you treat each one the same? Learners will reach decision points as they interact with clients and colleagues. Those decisions affect the outcome. If the learner's choices align with fair housing principles, she gets a sale. If the learner's choices do not, she'll have an opportunity to course correct. She will get fed more scenarios and have more opportunities to close deals until the time runs out. Along the way, learners have the opportunity to click out to view additional resources if they want to learn more. Now, sometimes in Fairhaven, we flip the script. The learner now finds herself in the shoes of a client on the receiving end of discrimination. Your agent was really nice to you on the phone, but when you come into the office and she sees the color of your skin, her demeanor changes. When an agent learns you're gay, she discourages you from moving into a particular neighborhood. Your agent keeps trying to steer you to a neighborhood where people of your national origin live, even though you've told them it's a long commute to your office. Each client point of view scenario is followed by video testimonials from real people who have experienced housing discrimination. With these powerful stories, Fairhaven aims to affect learners' emotions, to open them up to see and maybe even feel just a little the harm that discrimination causes in real people's lives. With this training, we ask learners to open their eyes and their hearts, challenge some of their own biases, and motivate deep reflection and ultimately behavior change. So we've set the bar high with Fairhaven. It's our goal for learners to come out of the experience seeing the world a little differently and feeling ready to confront these situations and know how to do the right thing for their clients, for themselves, and for their communities. The feedback we've gotten from the thousands of learners who have already completed Fairhaven has been overwhelmingly positive. Learners have told us they got angry or tearful when experiencing the client's point of view. They've told us that it's opened their eyes, given them new tools, and given them more motivation to stand up for clients in situations where something doesn't feel right. We're very proud of what we have created here, and I would encourage you all to take a visit. It's available for free to all NAR members at fairhaven.realtor, and there's the link. So before I shut down, I'm just going to make a quick plug for our Fair Housing Month resources and events. There's an article here from Realtor Magazine that sums it up very nicely that I'm just going to post in the chat there. But I especially want to call your attention to a big event we are co-hosting this Thursday with the Memorial Foundation. They're the folks who built the memorial to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the National Mall here in Washington, D.C. It's this Thursday, April 15th at 2 p.m. on NAR's Facebook Live. Entitled The Past, Present, and Future of Fair Housing. It's going to be narrated by Soledad O'Brien, and our featured speaker is HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge. Here's a link for that. I hope I'm posting my links in the right places. So we hope that you will join us for this great event. I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, I am too. That's awesome. It's going to be a great event. That's again, it's going to be April 15th. It's going to be 1 o'clock our time on Facebook Live, guys. So thank you all for those great overviews of what you guys are currently doing and how we and members can take advantage of all the resources and education opportunities you guys have provided. We're right on schedule to start our Q&A session. I have some questions already charted out for you all that you guys have, but I also want to make sure our members can ask questions. So guys, you can start putting your questions in the chat and I'll feed through those. Cherry, to answer your question, I'm not sure if that's really a housing issue or a COVID-19 thing, but obviously we're very sorry that happened to your granddaughter. And I think it goes along with what Alexia and Lori have talked about of discrimination and the implicit bias. And people just see someone in the way they look, they make assumptions. And we've definitely seen a lot of that this year because of COVID-19 and because of the misrepresentation of one group of people being the cause of the pandemic. So let's see what we got, guys. You're welcome. So first question is, yesterday, our social media director, Christina, had NAR's legal counsel and our HAR legal counsel on our Facebook Live, and I sent you guys the link last night. Not sure if you had time to watch it, but a question I thought was interesting that came up is the rebranding of the Fair Housing logo. And just really, you know, realtors are very innovative in their branding and marketing and social media and all that. And that logo is kind of, I guess, boring or plain. So the question was, though, why don't more realtors have that logo on their signage? So I was just curious if you guys had any feedback on that or any tips on how can you brand fair housing when marketing to consumers? And you guys, this kind of just open to both of you all. So whoever wants to kind of kick it off.
Well, I mean, I can kind of touch on that. But before I do, I do want to encourage everyone, if you've not already, to go through the Fair Haven exercise. I did it right after it came out when I was still with Maryland Realtors, and I was very, very impressed. It was a great tool. And I think that everyone should do it. And I'm excited to hear that, you know, a lot of these efforts in terms of education will move forward. I did a lot of research on fair housing, you know, continuing education requirements for realtors, and was, you know, disheartened to find that really only like half the states in the country have it as a requirement. So I would love to see that. You know, I can't really necessarily guess why more realtors don't, you know, use branding in terms of the, you know, are you speaking specifically to the Equal Housing Opportunity logo? I mean, I think, you know, some of it could just be, you know, that they don't have to. You know, we encourage it, absolutely. but that, that could be a piece of it. But I do think, and of course I'm just kind of speculating here. I know from NAFA's standpoint, we're doing a lot of efforts and rethinking. We're going through strategic planning right now, and incorporating into that, how can we better include realtors and realtor associations and brokers in our efforts in terms of education and putting themselves out there as a fair housing champion. In fact, it was funny because when Alexia was talking about them being fair housing champions, I was like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're looking at fair housing champions as well. So it's nice that we're having some consistency in thoughts and programs. But I think that encouraging fair housing, education, and realtors kind of putting themselves out there as being champions, whether it's sharing resources, whether it's a graphic, like a badge that they can say, I've completed this education, almost like with the with at-home diversity, just really putting themselves out there. And I do think that creating and reinforcing and encouraging a culture of accountability is a big part of that. So, these realtor fair housing champions need to get comfortable with, quite frankly, with calling out bad behavior, with reporting. That's what we're encouraging everyone right now. Report, report, report. And a lot of it doesn't happen in official channels in terms of making an official complaint with, a fair housing center. A lot of it's just, people telling anecdotal stories. I still have constantly, my realtor colleagues reaching out and saying, you can't believe this is what just happened. And I always encourage them to report it, but I understand that there's a lot of reasons why those things don't happen. And, Alexa might be able to talk more about, if NAR is starting to see or hear anecdotally about realtors using the 10.5 Code of Ethics to start reporting and just, start holding accountable. But I do think that's a huge part of it.
Thank you. I totally agree with that. Alexia, do you want to tackle this too?
I don't have too much to add. I know, we have traditionally used the At Home with Diversity certification behind someone's name as a signal that, you have gone through training and you are committed to serving diverse clients. And we're looking at, and we've had a lot of inquiries and a lot of interest, now that we're offering some additional fair housing courses, to maybe create another certification so that can be another, some letters that you put after your name to show that you're very committed to fair housing. I know that realtor.com I'm not deeply familiar with what's going on there, but there's something happening around when you do a search, you will be able to see if someone's done At Home with Diversity, and they might be updating it so that we can show consumers more, which realtors have gone through this training and taken these efforts. So that is something that's under discussion at NAR, and there is a real appetite and hunger for it. I will say a lot of folks are asking for it, and it's something that we're looking at.
Okay, that's good to know. So we're knocking on the right door. And Martha Beaudry, one of our members in one of our government affairs advisory group members, just posed a question, which I think coincides with what we just talked about. How are you guys going to measure the success for these fair housing initiatives? What's your idea of, obviously this is really hard to say, but kind of, do you have a measuring stick for if it's working or not? And Alexia, I'll start with you on that one.
So for Fairhaven, we have a learner survey at the end. Okay. And that gives us a picture of the kind of experience that learners are having. And it was very important for us to include that. And we were very happy with the results coming in right from the beginning. Both that people were giving it a high, like, numerical score ranking, that it was, it taught them something new, that it was beneficial to their business, that they would be able to apply these lessons every day. But also the narrative comments were really moving and made me feel really happy to be a part of this. People saying, wow, this has really changed the way I see things. To me, that says that we did something right with Fairhaven. The rest of them, they're sort of ongoing. We're in very nascent stages of, like, launching our self-testing program, looking at licensure reform. I think we're in early days, but we will continuously be looking for feedback, trying to get folks' ideas on how we can do better, and continuously improve what we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. Lori, what about you and Naka?
I think that there's a couple of different metrics and systems of measurement that we'll look at. Some of it is going to be, as Alexia mentioned, how many people took a training, how many people took a class. So that is a piece of it. And that is, in some of our, like the Keys Unlock Dreams, some of it, that's what we'll be looking at. How many people showed up for events, how many consumers, downloaded materials, how many industry partners or people showed up for events and participated. But I think the real meaningful metrics, it's going to take some time, some years, really, because as I mentioned, some of those partnership goals are 5 to 10 years out. So it's going to take some time to see the impacts of these efforts, of these programs. There's some down payment assistance programs that are being worked on. There are special purpose credit programs that are being worked on. So unfortunately, while so many of us, like me, I want these things to happen right now. I want to see progress now. It really is going to take some time to measure the statistics and to look at them. A lot of the data that we use for these things are years in arrears. Census data, American Community Survey data. So it's going to take a little bit of time for us to know.
I think that, that's so, I totally agree. And also, I hope that HAR can be sort of a conduit for the information, because there's so much information and so many people like you all doing great work in this area. I want to make sure the members can, find those resources in one place. And I know our communications director's on here, Matt Burris, so I'm saying that to him so we can get to work on that. But he also texted me to let me know that HAR, we include the Equal Housing Opportunity logo on all of our ads and branding. So shout out to that. That's great. And Christina Schaefer put in the chat as well that consumers can also search for members with that home diversity certification on our website. So that's 2 ways that we are working to make sure our members can brand that they are advocates of fair housing and equal opportunities. Let's see. Do we have any more questions from the our attendees? Because I can go all day picking these women's brains, but I want to make sure that our members have the ability to talk. So one question that I have, because I was recently asked to do one of these, not knowing, I guess living in my bubble, that this was something that's kind of abnormal and frowned upon. Lori emailed me yesterday to ask me about the love letter situation on offers. And then I think it came up as well on our Member Focus Monday. I have been asked in the past to do that, to kind of explain my spouse's background, kind of almost sell ourselves. And you guys mentioned earlier that sometimes as a person of color, you don't even realize that there's a microaggression or a discrimination being worked against you. That was kind of eye-opening to me, that me, myself, who I consider myself to be very, on trend and enlightened and know all the, and always looking, skeptical at things. I just was like, okay, cool, let's do it. Because I like to write. So I was like, yeah, we're great. We're awesome. I'm gonna write this letter about it. So why we should get this house. And then I realized that that's problematic. So I kind of want to talk about that. I'm sure our members maybe have had requests. if they're working with the buyer to do that, or they're receiving them if they're working with the sellers. So can you guys talk about that, what that really is, and what issues you guys see with the love letters? I'll start with you, Alexia.
Sure, I was just going to pull up an NAR article about it to post in the chat, but I'll do that in a minute.
Okay.
So in a love letter, so we have a white hot market right now. You know, you're seeing very competitive bidding situations, and some buyers have found that if they include a personal letter talking about why they love the house, that they might tug at the seller's heartstrings and get their offer chosen when maybe it's not necessarily the best offer. And there is a lot of risk there, because when you start revealing your personal characteristics, you might be encouraging the seller to choose you on a prohibited basis. Like if you say, I could see our family celebrating Christmas around the fire, you have now revealed your religion. And maybe somebody would choose you because you're Christian over someone from another religious background. So it's NAR's advice and encouragement, although it's not a rule, that that buyers, agents do not participate in writing these letters, that they do not deliver them, that sellers, agents do not accept them. If you do get one, you do not read it. If the buyer decides to go ahead and do it anyway, don't read it. You know, and it's a little bit of a tricky situation because it's the buyer who's deciding to write the letter, but it's the seller who could end up being liable if that letter causes them to choose an offer based on a prohibited basis. And now I'm going to let Lori add her 2 cents while I go try and find this NAR article to share with you all.
Yeah, it's an excellent article, and Alexia is absolutely right. You know, it's not illegal to do it, but it opens up the door to so many potential things. And it's important to note here that that the realtor is in it. You know, you're right there alongside your client in terms of presenting a letter, in terms of accepting a letter, and potentially using that letter to make an offer. So there could be fair housing violation implications for the agent as well. And so, you know, industry-wide, I hear over and over again a lot of advice to agents: just, you know, just don't do it. Don't participate in them at all. And you know, I just had a discussion with Tennessee realtors last week, and this issue came up. And it's, you know, what if they really want the house because grandma lives around the corner? And you know, that's real sweet, but these offers need to be evaluated on the merit, and not on any other characteristics at all. I realize that the home buying and selling process is inherently very emotional, but you really have to strip that out of it. And honestly, I'm going to take it one step further and say I would absolutely love to see buyers' names redacted from the contract altogether, because I have heard of scenarios where sellers have, you know, Googled the buyer, you know, let me see what they're all about, and you know, a lot of times people are pretty out there on social media. So not only is it your picture, but it could be, you know, religion, it could be your political status, it could be a whole host of things, which just opens up the possibility of discrimination. And so I strongly advise everyone to avoid it entirely.
Okay, this is a great topic. We have people in the chat box responding. You already answered the question about name bias on contracts, and what about doing the love letter, quote unquote, when it's an issue with credit? Just kind of more of an explanation, like an addendum, so to speak. You know, we could call it something else. Would that be something that you guys would that be a violation, or would that be allowable? Just your opinion. I know it's not like a law, but just your opinion.
So these were doing a rental application. They were trying to persuade the landlord that they could afford to pay the rent.
Yes. because that's something that I've seen because of the market so hot. When you're trying to lease a property, they're wanting, above level credit scores for a rental property. We can go buy a house. So I think that she means like you can explain if there are gaps in your credit or things like that. That would be a little bit different, I think, than talking about why you deserve to live in the house. You're just saying you can pay the rent timely.
I would say be extremely careful that you are not revealing any personal information that could touch one of the 7 prohibited bases under the Fair Housing Act. If you're only talking about your ability to pay the rent and that's it, that might not be a problem, but you have to be extremely careful. And regarding the other question from Stefan, and I apologize if I've pronounced that wrong, about suggesting that the buyer transmit their letter directly to the seller. No, we say you should not be involved in these letters at all. You should discourage them. You should warn your clients about the legal risk. And if they insist on doing it, you should not be a part of it. And you might even want to suggest that they talk to a lawyer so that they fully understand the liability issues that could come up.
Okay. Yeah, those are.
Yeah, the credit and finance issue is a interesting one. I don't know that I've necessarily seen that. I have heard about, so here in Maryland, there are sellers who are requesting a kind of a buyer financial summary statement. It's like a questionnaire that is almost like an additional underwriting survey where the seller says, I want you to tell me where you work, how long you've worked there, how much cash do you have in the bank, what is your credit score, and, kind of deeply personal underwriting types of things, which I find to be a head scratcher because, if they go through an approval process and they're qualified for the mortgage, like that should be it. That should be the end of the story. But the specific scenario came up because the gentleman who was being asked to fill out that form was a police officer. And he said, what if the seller hates police officers and I just take myself out of the running just based on that? So it's a real concern, and it can open up even beyond just really inherent discriminatory things. It can open up the possibility for bias, just like a lot of other things can. So that was kind of an interesting one, and I'll be following along to see if there's any action that comes of that.
Okay, thank you. I think this is another good question that goes with what you said, Lori and Alexia. When there's a driver's license photo required to accompany the application, how can you avoid fair housing issues? Because you see the person's name, their face, skin tone, all that kind of stuff, gender possibly. She says she personally requests driver's license after the landlord's accepted the application, which I think that's a good idea, Martha. But what are you guys' thoughts on that? How can I understand people need to be identified, and even for safety purposes, sometimes you do need to be able to know who the person is, background checks. But how can you avoid fair housing issues with requesting that?
I think you just have to apply the policy equally to all prospective tenants. And if you're asking everyone for the same documentation, I don't see a problem with it.
Okay.
No, and I absolutely agree with that. And I think that some of it is kind of about risk management. So there are certain elements to the process, whether it be buying or selling, that you're not going to be able to get around knowing, who the person is, what they look like, seeing their names. So there's elements of it that really can't be avoided. So like Alexia said, applying policies fairly across the board, and just realizing where potential pain points could be and doing your best to mitigate them, I think is another good strategy.
I agree. And I think that's why the education component and what you are doing to train and bring awareness to implicit bias, discrimination is going to be so helpful, because you certainly can't avoid what people see initially. but getting trained to make sure you're aware of your own bias and judgment internally is going to be really helpful in combating that. So we have just a few minutes left. I want to ask one last question of you two. And I always ask people this, where it's like the official or some other person that we're meeting with, is how can we help you all move your fair housing efforts forward? Obviously, there are rules that realtors have to abide by, those providing housing, selling homes. But what else can we do besides the, participating in the classes and whatnot to move this forward? What are some ideas you all have for us at HAR? And Lori, we'll start with you.
I think that some of the things I've kind of already touched on in terms of being a champion of fair housing in your community, holding colleagues and consumers accountable by reporting violations. I would say, and some of these things are kind of diversity and inclusion related, but that really goes hand in hand with fair housing efforts. Partnership with multicultural associations, ARIA, NARA, NARA, get involved with those organizations. Being a champion of fair housing in your community and partnering with organizations, show up for their events, share their content on social media. And I think that, and of course, realtors, can do this on their own. I would encourage them, of course, to, work with brokers or work with associations, but I think consumer education could be another big piece of that. Come up with a flyer or one pager, something to include in your buyer and seller packets or presentations to inform them about fair housing. What are the rights? What are the responsibilities? What to do if they feel like, that they've been a part of, a discrimination action, and to further enforce in that it's not just the legal, the ethical, all of that part, but they cannot abide by their any kind of discriminatory instructions by their clients, because they could lose their license or they could be penalized as well. So it's a little bit of a kind of a cover yourself, because I do concede that it would have to be an incredibly uncomfortable situation for a realtor when faced with some type of a discriminatory client instruction. How do you handle that? A very strong-willed person might just shut the whole thing down and say, I'm sorry, I can't abide by that, and I will not, have you as a client. We're not a good fit for this transaction. But I think that's probably a really, really difficult thing to say to someone, and a really difficult conversation to have. So if you include in your presentation some instruction and some education for the consumer, it will help. It'll help with that.
Thank you. That's a great point. Alexia, how about you? What do you?
Lori, you knocked it out of the park there. I think maybe you and I should go on a speaking tour together. She covered it. I mean, and we have brochures available for educating consumers in our store that you can include with your packets about their fair housing rights. If something doesn't feel right, speak up. Keep educating yourself. There's so much great information out there. Understand, as William Faulkner said, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. How did we become a nation of homeowners? In Europe, they don't have a 73% home ownership rate. It's because the government in this country decided that home ownership was something that they wanted to encourage, going back over generations, except they only made those opportunities available to Christian white people for many generations. And so when my grandfather came back from World War II, that was when I'm going off on a tangent here of the history, but I love telling this story because we venerate those World War II veterans as the greatest generation. We became a nation of homeowners after World War II, when the federal government subsidized the building of the suburbs for the returning GIs. The builders were subsidized, so the homes were really cheap, and the mortgages were subsidized so that the returning GIs could get great financing. And that's how so many of these suburban subdivisions that you see were built, like in the late 1940s, early 50s. It was for these returning GIs. But restrictive covenants were written into all of those deeds. And that moment in time when America became a nation of homeowners left a lot of people out. So think about how your life would be different if your grandparent hadn't been allowed to buy the house that they owned. The past is never dead. It isn't even past. The one last thought I'll leave you with is, you can take implicit bias training, but the best way to break down your own biases is to actually have meaningful personal relationships with people across lines of difference. And that doesn't just mean knowing people of different backgrounds at work. It means having deep friendships and social relationships with people who are different from you. So as Lori said, attend those events, get to know people, break down those barriers. That will help you treat all clients more equally, and maybe it'll help raise the homeownership rate in some of those communities that have been traditionally neglected.
Thank you, guys. Both of you guys both knocked out the ballpark. I concur. You guys need to make this a road show of fair housing. This has been so informative and excellent. And I just want to thank both of you all. And I do agree with working on having more meaningful relationships with people who don't look like you. I always try to find common ground with people. I'm forced to work with people in my role, in my profession, and in life from everywhere. And finding common ground with someone is really a great approach. So I would say do that with your consumers as well, and your fellow realtor friends as we navigate fair housing, and hopefully once and for all really see some changes to what was instituted decades ago. So again, just thank you all for being here. Everyone saying they enjoyed the information, and thanking you all. Please keep in touch with us. Keep us posted on training, on events. Hopefully in the future we can have an in-person event with you all, and so we can meet you all. That would be lovely. I think that Houston is just a great area for this change. Now I look forward to seeing that HAR is going to be at the forefront of innovation and change, and I look forward to us working with you all to ensure we do the same for fair housing. So thank you again, and thank you, Teresa Murphy, for administering, facilitating the Zoom meeting, and Rita Blevins-Klein, our professional development director, for allowing me to moderate this today. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. So that's it for us today. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Take care.